Dare County Planning Board meeting for Monday, September 14 will come to order. Please let the minutes reflect that members Finelli, Barr, Gore, Hines, Shelton are present. Beth Midget is participating remotely, and she will be counted as present. David Overton is absent this evening. Everybody should have a copy of the minutes from the previous meeting. Do we have any additions, deletions, or corrections to those minutes?
Move that they be approved.
Second.
We have a motion from Michael Barr, a second from Terry Gore to approve the minutes as written. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 That says aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Now's the time in the meeting we set aside for public comment. First of all, is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak at public comment? Donna, do we have any email public comments?
No, sir, we did not receive any email public comment, and just for those out there, the only person that's here in the audience is Mr. Fish tonight, so he's
Okay.
here representing the subdivision plat.
Thank you. We'll declare the public comment section closed. We're going to move on to new business. And first item there is a preliminary plat review. Payne Estates on Roanoke Island. Don, you want to start us off on this?
Yes, sir. Mr. Fish is here tonight with us. He's the surveyor for this, and this is the Joyce Payne Bell subdivision here on Roanoke Island. We approved a plat for a 7-lot subdivision plat for Miss Bell last year, and that plat has been recorded. Subsequent to that plat being recorded, she decided that she wanted to have another lot added to that to subdivide. And so she has submitted another preliminary plat that is showing what she's calling Lot 8, Lot 8 being following the sequencing of the previous subdivision plat that she recorded. It has frontage on Payne Road, which is an existing state-maintained road. The lot is well over the required minimum lot size. There are 2 existing structures on the property. As you'll see on the preliminary plat, the use of those structures is not noted on the preliminary plat, so Mr. Fish needs to note that for the record tonight. The structures are located on the property in conformance with the principal use setbacks. Once the overlay of the lot lines occur, staff recommends approval of the preliminary plat.
Okay, thank you. So would you just state your name and go ahead and if you want to add on to, if you want to add to Donna's comments there.
Sure. Timothy Fish. I'm working for Miss Bell.
Okay,
The 2 buildings are storage buildings at this time. And I'll note that on the final. Basically, she just, they had a lot that wasn't working with the buildings there, and they weren't sure what to do on the previous subdivision, so they waited till they figured it out. Now submitting this plan where they figured out what they wanted to do with the building.
okay, thank you. Board members, comments or questions for the applicant or staff?
I'm satisfied.
This is looking too easy here. In that case, the chair will entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the preliminary plat.
We have a motion on the floor by Terry Gore to approve the preliminary plat. We have a second by Buddy Shelton. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
That's Beth reports aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking your time and coming in this evening. Stay safe.
Thank you. You too.
Have a good evening, Mr. Fish.
Thank you very much.
That was an easy one.
Okay, moving on, under other business, it's a continued discussion of the travel trailer park ordinance. We made a lot of progress the last couple of months. Donna's written up a draft ordinance here. Donna, want to go ahead and start us off?
Yes, sir,
Any
Mr.
comments?
Chairman, I'll be glad to. You'll see that you have a copy of the draft ordinance in your packet, and I have gone through and taken out a lot of the language that had strike-through language in there, so it flows better. The changes tonight that we'll be discussing are in red text, just to make them more apparent. And I'm just going to go through my staff memo, which highlights those changes. Some of the changes are things that I realized after our last discussion, but the majority of them reflect the discussion from last month. The definition of all-weather surface has been deleted. We have standards in the road section that requires gravel improved roads, and when I was reading back through this, I thought that may be a conflict or maybe create the illusion of inconsistency. So it's my recommendation that we delete that definition of all-weather surface and rely on the standards that are in the road standards section of the ordinance. The next change is in 160.22.0. That language, as it reads now, says each park shall have a central structure or structures that will provide separate toilet and shower facilities for both sexes. I've just put a sentence in there that just says concession areas with retail sales and laundry facilities may be provided in the park for park guests. There was some other language that was in there that talked about concession area and laundry facilities and not having a sign and all that, and it just seemed a little bit cumbersome, and so I deleted that language and put in that sentence there. The next change is on page 10, section W. There was a lot of discussion last month about the tenure and the length of time that someone stays in the camper cabins, the travel trailers, the alternative camping units, and our camping tents. And it was noted that we should include some reference to the North Carolina Vacation Rental Act. And that's what that statement there says. The length of occupancy of any travel trailer, camper cabin, alternative camping unit, and/or camping tent shall be consistent with the North Carolina Vacation Rental Act as established in NCGS 42A. That Vacation Rental Act establishes a 90-day time frame. After 90 days, then it's considered a long-term rental. So instead of having a specific time period in there, we are referencing that Vacation Rental Act in lieu of a specific time period. Revised section 160.24, additional standards for camping cabins, alternative camping units, and camping tents. You'll see where I've got the red language in there. The red language talks about what the board voted on last month, the size limit for camping cabins and alternative camping units, that would be 600 square feet of enclosed area. The square footage of decks and unenclosed areas shall not exceed 50% of the square footage of a camping cabin, but in no instance shall the square footage of decks and unenclosed areas exceed a maximum of 300 square feet. Steps, stairs, and stairways shall not be included in the square footage of the unenclosed areas. And I think actually what that needs to say is the square footage of decks and unenclosed areas shall not exceed 50% of the square footage of a camper cabin, and reference an alternative camping unit as well. Close up that loop hole there. A maximum of 2 camping cabins and alternative camping units may be connected by unenclosed areas according to the square footage limitations of subsection 2 of this section, and the units shall be separated by a minimum of 15 feet. So that was the discussion of last month. I went back and included the definitions that were previously in there for unenclosed area and enclosed area so that we have those defined. The next change is on page 12, 160.26, parent C. I added the statement, the design of any cul-de-sac or turnaround area shall be consistent with the North Carolina Department of Transportation standards. There was some discussion that it was okay to allow a non-traditional turnaround if it met DOT standards or if it was consistent with what DOT recognizes, and not necessarily rely on a cul-de-sac as the turnaround. The language now has a radius of 80 feet in some reference to the cul-de-sac and no option for a turnaround. So that gives it a little bit of flexibility. 160.32 is the camping spaces at commercial sites. That's at the bottom of page 13 is where it starts. We did not have an opportunity to discuss this language last month. We had acknowledged in our previous conversations that if you had an existing commercial site and you wanted to go in and put in some areas to accommodate travel trailers or alternative camping units, that we would have some standards in the ordinance that allowed you to have camping spaces in conjunction with other commercial uses, but still not be considered a campground. And so that's where that section is coming in. We are referencing the specific zoning districts where campgrounds are allowed in area zone C2, C3, I1, S1, and Highway 345. Camping spaces may be developed on a commercial site in conjunction with other commercial uses according to the following provisions. So we're making a distinction between what is exclusively a campground and then you having as an accessory or as one of your multi-uses on a piece of property, the ability to accommodate travel trailers and alternative camping units. And it seemed that I recollected from our previous conversation, I couldn't find it in my notes, that it was the consensus of the board not to allow camper cabins or spaces for camping cabins in conjunction with the other commercial uses, that if they were going to do that, that needed to be reviewed as a group development. And so that's why I have that language there in A, camping cabins. I wanted to have the board confirm or deny my recollection of whether we wanted camping cabins or if only at existing commercial sites are you allowed to have alternative camping spaces in travel trailer parks. So if you guys would please let me know if I'm on the right track there. A minimum of 20 camping spaces, the idea being that we just don't want folks to have one or two spots there. 20 is just a number that I pulled out of my head based on our conversation. There was some discussion about what was the appropriate number. Do we need to have the 2-acre minimum? And so if 20 is not right, if it's too low, then let me know. If it's too high, then we can fall back on that. And then it just goes on to say that they can have the camping spaces configured as either the free-form or the fixed space layout, and that they're subject to conditional use review. That they have to be grouped together on this commercial site, that they can share water and wastewater facilities if that's approved at the time during the conditional use permit review on a case-by-case basis, and that ownership of the camping spaces shall be retained by the owner. And I need to change that because it says in F there on page 14, ownership of camping spaces shall be retained by the park owners. And it's not really considered a park. It's going to be the commercial property owner. So I need to change that language so that it's not referring to it as a park. Let's see, the other one is added section 160.51 about the need for park owners to notify park guests if an evacuation order is ordered by Dare County. Beth at the last meeting had talked about people being in travel trailers or in campers, and, you know, what if when we have bad weather, and what should the park owners be doing for that? And I struggled with writing this language because, you know, we have weather conditions that blow up, and in the instance that she referred to, it was a tornado that was associated with a storm, but it wasn't a storm that had prompted an evacuation order, and those people were caught up in a tornado. And so, you know, if there's thunderstorms moving through and there's a tornado warning or a tornado watch issued, then I don't know what responsibility the park owner is expected to have. Now, if there is an evacuation order by Dare County, then certainly the park owner should be willing and should take it upon themselves to make sure that whoever is in his campground, that they're aware of that order and that they take appropriate action. So that's why I tied it to the evacuation order. And Beth, it's not exactly what you were getting at, but I couldn't quite figure out how to write that. And the more I thought about it, I just, you know, people have to have some common sense and take care of themselves. And I didn't want us to put language in there that was going to be cumbersome for the park owners and that was going to be cumbersome for the staff to enforce. So I'm going to stop right there and let you guys tell me what else we need to do.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to go through this page by page, but before we do that, are we missing anything big? Is there any definition that we need to include? If we sort of covered the various scenarios? Been working on it for several months, so I think we're pretty well covered, but did anybody notice anything?
No, I think we're covered really well. This is Beth.
Thank you, Beth.
Where we're tying it to the Vacation Rental Act for the 90 days or less than 90 days, does that put any burden on the park owners to be licensed brokers? I'm not sure. I mean,
I don't know the answer to that.
Nobody seems to know.
Yeah, you guys told me to put that language in there, so I did.
Mr. Hines?
Well, they're not gonna be required because they're the owners.
Right.
And the owner can write any kind of lease he wants. He can have a lease.
We're just referencing the
Right.
10-year limitation of the Vacation Rental Act. Is that not what it says? Is that not
Right.
specific to that? I mean, we can go in there and put other language that says, you know, other provisions of the Vacation Rental Act may not apply, but
yeah, I just, you know, just to be clear, I would probably put that because, you know, there's just that whole other, there's so many other things that apply. The one thing that does apply if they are under a lease document is they do have to abide by mandatory evacuation orders, but I think you've already covered that.
I feel like we need to, I think when you bring up the word Vacation Rental Act, it's going to imply that we're trying to adhere to the Vacation Rental Act. So I think the timelines are good.
So what if we say the length of occupancy of any travel trailer, camper cabin, alternative camping unit, and or camping tent shall be consistent with the time frames established in the North Carolina Vacation Rental Act?
Yeah.
Or in reference to, or some kind of, it's not misleading.
Yeah, because that has tax implications also. So we have to do occupancy tax up until 89 days, and then after that, we don't have to do that. So I somehow, I'm not sure how to word it, but I don't want to imply that they have to be licensed or if there's anything weird like that.
Well, and we also don't want to get into the provisions of the Vacation Rental
Yeah,
Act.
it's very cumbersome.
So I think we reference the dates and the times, that's one thing, but
Yeah.
we need to lose the word Vacation Rental Act.
Yeah, one way to circumvent this may just be to go into the Vacation Rental Act and use their wording in reference to the occupancy restrictions, but not specifically reference the Vacation Rental Act itself.
Correct, I agree.
I think referencing the act is a good thing.
Yeah.
And like Donna said, I mean, they might change it. There might be changes, and rather than us having to go back, or Dare County having to go back and revise their ordinance, you know, if it references that act, if the act changes, it's still gonna pass along down the road.
But there's a lot more language in the Vacation Rental Act
Yeah.
besides just the dates.
I understand
Oh, yeah.
that.
So-
Correct. It is very involved. So I think the time frame is a really good time frame. Again, the tax implications when you go beyond that 89 days are different. So I just think that using the time frame is appropriate.
And the time frame of the Vacation Rental Act is 89 days or less? I'm looking to see if I saved that.
Correct.
The act.
Correct.
On my
Yeah.
laptop.
When it goes to 90 days, it is a different entity.
So why don't we just say that then?
I only say that because there's 3 licensed brokers on this board that,
Yeah.
that understand the full capacity of what the Vacation Rental Act means.
Yeah, it's incredibly cumbersome. And most of it has to do with accounting, to be honest with you. I mean, how the money's handled, where it's kept, when it's
I
distributed.
think, you know, what she's got written here is very clear. It says length of occupancy. And that's the only thing it references. That's the only part it's saying, whatever the Vacation Rental Act says about that, that's what applies here.
Or maybe, you're right, maybe you can attach to that just on a timestamp only kind of thing, date-wise, like 89 days, 90 days.
I don't think you need to do that.
I think it's, yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I think it says that. The
It
length
says
of
exactly
occupancy.
what it needs to say,
Mm.
what she's got in red right now. I think that we don't need to add anything or take anything away.
I think just
What page are you on?
triple check with Bobby Alton maybe, or just to make sure that we're not tying anything else to that. Again, when you get into past 90 days, then tax changes and there's different changes there. So I just think, I know what we're after. I think is just limit that, but I just don't want to tie it to anything more than what we intended.
Well, we can also call the real estate commission.
No, we'll just change the time frame
We're just
so it
asking
says
for money.
89 days with whatever the Vacation Rental Act says, so that we're not referencing that, because we don't want to anyone to think that we're trying to do anything other than the length of time. So if that's what we're trying to do, then that's what we'll do. We'll tie it to the length of time that the Vacation Rental Act says, which is 89 days or less, or whatever that language is that's in the Vacation Rental Act. I'll pull that out and use that verbiage and make it work for us. I'm trying to look through that as I'm reading and talking at the same time to see
Well-
exactly what that says.
And like Michael was getting to too, though, that way, if that act changes down the road, do we have the right to come back in and change it for Dare County?
Of course we do.
We can, but the problem is getting caught in the lurch of it changes, but if we put specific times in there,
Well, what's the likelihood that they're going to change that day?
slim to none right
Yeah.
now, but you never know.
Got it, yeah. I agree. It's, that is pretty rock solid legislation, and it's held up, since whatever, 2000. And I think there have been only a few tweaks. So I think it's pretty rock solid.
And if we state the number of days, then everybody can read it and understand it and not have to go refer
Not have to
the
go
act.
look up what the Vacation Rental Act says.
Yeah,
Yeah, good idea.
Like Donna's doing now.
Yeah, like Donna's doing now, yeah. Okay, so that's what we'll do then. Okay, so noted. 89 days is what we're working on.
Yeah, 89 days or less.
Okay.
all right, let's just go through this page by page then. Does anybody have any comments or changes on page 1? Page 2.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, this may be nitpicky, but on page 1, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm no attorney, but it says, it shall be unlawful for any person to develop. What about a legal entity like an LLC or something like that?
So we can put in there any person or entity,
Person, firm, or corporation.
Yeah.
whatever.
Whatever the,
Entity covers a pretty broad ground.
yeah.
So we're striking person.
Yeah, strike person, and then we would also strike he/she holds and put they hold.
How
I kinda
about we
like
just say unless a valid permit is issued by Dare County?
Okay.
Just strike it.
I think you can leave person in there, say person or entity.
I'm leaving the word person in.
Yeah, I don't
there.
see any
Yeah.
harm in
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
That's a good point, Terry. Thank you.
Quite welcome.
Okay, anything, say page 3. Page 4. Page 5. 6. 7. When we get to page 8, Donna mentioned earlier that we're not treating these commercial sites where people can have as few as 20 travel trailers. We're not calling that a park.
Mhm.
So on page 8, you'll see standards for all parks. Not all of that applies to those commercial areas. So when it says you have to be at least 2 acres, that does not apply. Page 9. I had one change that I mentioned to Donna. On page 9, Q, where it says mobile homes, it should be unlawful for a person to occupy, park, or store a mobile home in a park. There's an exclusion there, and that would apply to the employees of the park.
Unless it's used for housing, for employee housing purposes, yeah.
Okay? So that change will be included. Page 10.
I think we've hashed that out pretty well.
Yeah. Page 11. If anybody needs more time to look at something, please let me know. Page 12. On page 13, near the bottom, that 160.32, it's talking about camping spaces at commercial sites.
And Mr. Chairman, I think based on what you just said about how it's not considered a park, that I'll go in and put a phrase to that, saying that camping spaces at commercial sites, and just say, you know, the provision of something that references that it's not considered a standalone campground, that it's one use that's occurring on a mixed use site.
Okay, that'd be good to expand on it, yes. And that says you have to have a minimum of 20 camping spaces for travel trailers and alternative camping units. Is that a good number?
I'm fine with it.
Sounds reasonable. I don't really have a frame of reference on it, to be 100% honest.
Sounds good.
I'm fine with it. We need to have some type of minimum so we don't just have, a couple people plopping down trailers, but it's less than the number of sites you would have in a 2-acre park, so I'm good with it. Beth, any comments on the minimum 20 camping spaces for commercial sites?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay. Are we in agreement that we're not going to include camping cabins? And should someone want to do a camping cabin, that would be part of a group development?
I agree, yeah.
Everybody here seems to be in agreement. Beth, do you like that?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else on page 13?
So just going back to the 20 camping cabin sites, if you're doing them at a fixed configuration, is 30,000 square feet of area. So you know.
We got 30,000 square feet plus.
Plus
driveways,
whatever else is there,
parking,
yeah, so
every
it's
parking
gonna
and
have
all.
to, it's gonna have to be a large site,
Right.
yeah.
Page 14. Well, near the top under F, where it says ownership of camping spaces shall be retained by, it said the park owner, so we're changing that.
Yes, sir.
Because again, on the commercial sites, it's not a park.
Yeah.
Anything else on page 14? Page 15.
Can I back up for a second? Page 14,
Yes.
camping spaces shall not be individually conveyed or sold in fee simple title as condominiums or for interval ownership. Would that kind of encompass fractional ownership?
Good question.
What's the difference between that? Explain that to me.
Fractional ownership can be,
That's different than interval ownership?
no, I'm asking, does it kind of make sure that it's not,
Well, that's not a term I'm familiar with, so if that's a real estate term, that is,
fractional ownership is, as it implies, there's fractional owners, not interval owners.
okay, so it would be like me owning a quarter or a fifth, okay, whatever.
Right.
Beth?
I was trying to be as inclusive as I could be, so if that's what we need to say, then that's what we need to say.
Anybody else have an opinion on that?
Good
I
question.
do round so I'm behind you.
Okay, so if that's the case, then I'm gonna use that same language in the other sections where I talk about the ownership, okay?
For my benefit, would you repeat that once more?
Fractional ownership is just a
No, I meant
different,
the language that you wanted to see.
just wanted to include, somewhere in that sentence to include fractional ownership as well, where it says not to be conveyed or sold in fee simple title as condominiums or for interval ownership. Also add the word or fractional ownership.
Yeah.
It's just another way of preventing.
Yeah, another comma and another phrase in there, yeah.
Good catch.
Thank you. Seem to be in agreement on that. Anything else on page 14? Page 15.
Just want to throw it out, because you said that we were playing with wordsmithing this a little bit. The standard that I'm held to as a vacation rental property manager is to make a commercially reasonable effort. So when we talk about things like notifying people of an evacuation order, I think that may be a good thing to look at, may not be, but for example, the park owner shall make a commercially reasonable effort to notify park guests of the order. Or each park owner shall develop a storm response plan of commercially reasonable actions that will be taken before, during, or after storm event. Just because I do know that does have an actual legal point of reference. And if unfortunately, the few times I've been up in front of, talking about the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, when my actions have been questioned, I can't control outcomes, but I can control the fact that I did or did not make a commercially reasonable effort to secure the appropriate outcome for my client. So again, just a thought. I'm not advocating for it. It's just what popped in my head when we started looking at wordsmithing it. So
I'll tweak that a little bit. So with the Vacation Rental Act, that was the first time that anybody has, as a leasee, as a renter, has been commanded to follow evacuation orders. And I think somehow, some way, when an evacuation order is called for Dare County, just like a person that rents the property, somehow they also need to obey evacuation orders. And again, we're trying not to refer too much to the Vacation Rental Act because these are not licensed brokers, but that would be the standard that I think, that's what I'm seeing lacking personally, visually.
It was not, it was not my intent to say that they have to make those people in the campground evacuate. That's not what the intent of that statement is. And that's not what my intent was, because if there's a mandatory evacuation order issued by Dare County, then that's the mandatory evacuation order. I don't want to put something in the ordinance that's going to be my responsibility to enforce. If there's language in there that says the park owners have to have their guests evacuate, then I don't know about that. I'm entirely uncomfortable with that. You guys tell me to put it in there, I'll put it in there. I'm just telling you that I'm uncomfortable with it.
So what I'm saying is the Vacation Rental Act does command renters to do that. And then we had an incident with, I believe, I can't remember, it was Arthur, whatever that July storm was, 3-4 years ago. And then we had to put something in there that said after a certain point, the renters were trespassing. What I'm saying is, my gosh, if we're doing public safety, people in houses on pilings or on a foundation are more safe than the people in trailers. Somehow we have to look out for their safety. And I don't know how, or if this is even the proper mechanism. It may not be, but I've seen it time and time again where people in campers don't evacuate and then things happen. So.
But the burden is not placed on the county. The
Yeah.
burden is placed on
Placed
the
on the park
property
owner,
owner
yeah,
or the rental company.
yeah.
And I think this is perfectly fine myself, because I think that the point is if he has a plan and it's up to him to do that plan, it's not up to you to enforce it. And it's not up to the county to enforce it.
And the only reason, and Buddy, you will recall this because you were on you were my building inspector at the time we did this. When we went back and put that language in the flood ordinance and in the travel trailer park ordinance about the travel trailers having to be ready for highway ready use, we had meetings with all the campground owners, and there was a lot of concern that we were going to make, how we were going to interpret the FEMA standard and all of that. And so I don't want us to stir up the campground owners again, because we're making the campground owners that will be approved after this change have an evacuation plan, and the other parks will not have to have an evacuation plan. And so I'll write in there whatever you guys think is right. I'm just telling you, the enforcement of it is what is causing me concern.
I think it should remain just simple, and that they should have a plan. It's going to be up to them to manage that plan and do what's right.
I think a responsible campground owner is going to tell the people, take your travel trailers and leave.
Right. And I think it's
Because he
the
doesn't
same,
want to have
same
to.
thing with rental property.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, the owner or the management company is gonna come tell those people to get out. But there's nobody to enforce
No.
and make him do that. And why should he have
Yes, there
something
is.
like?
Yes, there is. If you have it written right in your lease, yes, there is. We can actually enforce trespassing.
Wow.
What I'm saying is, in my experience, what I've seen on here on Hatteras Island is we have campers that stay. If it's not supposed to be a huge storm, they will not make them leave. And then, what happens is sometimes it gets pumped up as far as it gets on the Gulf Stream, and then we're in a whole different world of things. And then guess what? Who's left with it but the local fire departments and local things? I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay.
I don't think that's gonna change regardless of what you write in there. People are either gonna choose to leave or not to leave, whether they're in a camper, a house or whatever.
Well-
And we're trying to stay away from the wording of the Vacation Rental Act. We just went through that on the other section. Do we really need to throw it in here and enforce parts of it on the property owners? If they have a plan and they don't follow their plan, or they can't get their people to follow their plan, then, I mean, I don't mean this to sound ugly, but that's on them. We're trying to write and develop a travel trailer park ordinance, not an evacuation plan for the park owners. I mean, I agree with you, Beth, about the safety and all that, but I don't think it needs to be in this ordinance.
Well, let me make sure I'm really clear on what I'm saying here. I know what Beth is talking about because I've had to literally physically do it, where you go out, you tell people to leave, there's an evacuation order, they won't leave. I have to call the county sheriff. The sheriff comes out and the sheriff has to enforce a trespassing ordinance. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is if there's something going on like a storm is coming, I have to make what's called a commercially reasonable effort. Here's what that looks like up front. So let's say that a tenant who is renting from me says that I did not make a commercially reasonable effort to inform them of some type of material change. I have to prove that I did make a commercially reasonable effort. That looks like this. A storm is coming. I have required upon your lease you to give me a telephone number and an email address. I have emailed you and texted you to let you know what's going on. It is incumbent upon you as the tenant to check your text and your emails. If I can prove that I sent the text and sent the email, then I have, now in the case of an evacuation, it's a little bit different, but with other material changes, I have absolved myself of my responsibility. I have met the threshold of commercially reasonable standard. And that's why I like that wording, is because it's very clear. Did I do something with the clear intent that any reasonable business person would do in order to get the information from my firm to my client or to my customer? That's what I wanted to be very clear on. So I think that that is a good standard universally to say that if there's a storm coming or if there's anything else, but in this particular situation, a named storm is coming, they need to make a commercially reasonable effort. They need to have some mechanism that they utilize to communicate, and they need to be able to prove, if questioned later, that they utilize said mechanism. It is still incumbent upon the individual renting the property, well, utilizing the travel trailer park, to follow through. But that is the delineation of where the burden of responsibility shifts. And that's what I would like to see because, well, that's what I think would be probably best for all parties concerned. Because then we do get into enforcement and we do get in trying to enforce real estate law. And I just don't know that we have the authority to do that. but that's me.
Well, there are existing laws. I don't think we need to duplicate existing laws. I don't think we need to contradict them. I mean, I like the language that's here now. If you think there can be something that added, or anybody else thinks something can be, the wording can be changed, I don't want to place an enforcement burden on the planning department that already exists somewhere else in Dare County, like with the sheriff. I don't want to go shifting that burden. And also what Donna said about the travel trailer parks that have been in existence before and are grandfathered may not be subject to this. So that's just my personal opinion. If one of you thinks that there's better wording towards this, which accomplishes the same thing but does not put an enforcement burden on the planning board that already exists, like with the sheriff's department, we can do that.
I kind of agree with that, and I think my concern is if you try to get into the enforcement arena, then you've also got liability. And if it doesn't get done, they're not gonna come back to the park owner, they're gonna come back to you.
Yeah.
And so I think that it needs to be the responsibility of the park to develop a plan, not for you to enforce it, but for them to try to do what's right for their customers.
I agree.
Terry, do you have wording that you think would be?
Yeah, I mean, the only two places I would change, and I don't think it changes the intent at all, is it would read like this. Each park owner shall develop a storm response plan of commercially reasonable actions that they will take, that will be taken before, during, and after storm events. In the event evacuation orders are issued by Dare County, the park owner shall make a commercially reasonable effort to notify park guests of the order.
I would say recorded efforts. They have to keep notes.
Yeah, but that way they can prove that they did something. Whether it's a text message, an email, whatever the agreed upon medium of communication is, they have communicated it.
Again, I don't think that's not up to us. That's up to the park owner. If you put that in there, if you put something like that in there, who's going to enforce it? And why put something in there that you're not going to enforce? I don't mind the reasonable action or put in that reasonable comment, that's fine. But I think that should be as far as we go.
I don't want to overthink it, but I think personally what Terry's getting at is not an enforcement issue. It's
Yeah.
just making sure that the park owner knows what their responsibility is during a named storm evacuation.
But
Yes.
if you got a park plan, that's gonna define their keyword, their responsibility. And there's no implied planning board or planning department responsibility. Well, you said you've got to do this and nobody come and told me and all that. Let's keep the planning board strictly out of that. Make it a
Well, I think
park
the other
owner
thing is,
responsibility.
what you're talking about comes from another legal entity that doesn't exist for these parks. And trying to apply that to the parks, I don't think is worth doing.
Where I'm confused is I don't see where what I said has an enforcement element.
Well, I agreed with you as far as, except for the comment that Beth made about recordable. I don't think that's necessary because there's nobody there to enforce it.
That would be, trying to think of a better way to phrase this. That would be a way for the reason I do recordable things is so I can cover myself if I'm ever sued.
And the park owner, if he does his job and he has good common sense, he would do the same thing.
Yeah.
But I
So
don't think we have to tell him he's got to do that.
fair enough. Yeah.
So let's just play this out, okay? We have this in here. Joe Smith comes in and gets a campground approved. We have an approved plan. There's a storm. Somebody decides not to leave. His trailer gets busted all up. He has a falling out with the campground owner. And then they come in and find this language in there. Then they're going to come back on Dare County and say, Dare County, you said that he was supposed to advise me of the order, which is all that he has to do. That's all this language says that he has to do, is tell them there's an evacuation
I
order.
agree with you 100%.
I'm telling you, we don't need to have language in this ordinance that implies that Dare County has a responsibility other than the mandatory evacuation. And, you know, that's all that language says, is all you got to do is tell them. Because I had stronger language in here that said you need to keep a name and a contact, and you need to do this and you need to do that. And the longer I worked on it, I was just like, you know, I think we're overstepping our responsibilities.
I hear what you're saying, Donna, but, and I don't know the balance. We just are in a place that we know more events are happening, and public safety, somehow, some way, these campgrounds are not, I'm just in my observation, they're not doing the same thing.
Right, and this language isn't going to do anything about the existing campgrounds that's out there because we can't retroactively apply it. You can't protect people from themselves, but so much. If they don't have enough sense to get out one of these little eco tents that's out there or a travel trailer, then I mean, I just don't know how far we need to go with this. We have an evacuation order, and you know, you can sign up and get text alerts, or you can sign up and you can do all of this that Dare County does. But I think that's what emergency management does. And if emergency management is concerned about the travel trailers and the campgrounds, then they need to be telling the travel trailer park owners and the campgrounds, you need to have a plan to get your people out of there, and not the Dare County campground ordinance being the one that does that. This is not the vehicle to do that.
Okay.
Well, unless somebody has a motion to make, we have some text in front of us. We will use that text. Again, unless someone has a specific motion to make, please do so at this time. I have heard no response, so
Well, I would say that, you know, I don't know exactly what the motion chart should be, but rather than having to go back over this horse again next month,
I'm talking about a motion just on
this particular.
just on that red text.
I think we just have a vote, just like we did on the other ones.
But I mean,
But we gotta have something to vote on.
I think we ought to leave it just like it is.
we're going to vote on this as a package. I'm talking about this one paragraph.
Talking about 160.160.
I'll make a motion that we
One-
leave.
160.51, it's in there unless somebody makes a motion to amend it. So does anybody wish to make a motion to amend it? Hearing none, this will be in the text that we're going to vote on here shortly.
Mr. Chairman, if we get to the point where you are making a motion to adopt or to recommend approval of the ordinance, we do need to have a text amendment for the C3 zoning district and the C2 zoning districts. C3, I'm sorry. C3, the C3 zoning district doesn't specifically outline campgrounds and travel trailer parks as a permitted or a conditional use. And we have travel trailer parks in C3 zoned areas. And if we're going through this exercise here. I think that it's appropriate for us to amend the text of the C3 district to clear up that. In the past, it was an interpretation that the C3, which is a very broad commercial district, is consistent, that campgrounds and travel trailer parks are consistent with that. And there's one in Buxton that is there and it's zone C3, but C3, when you look at the standards, it doesn't specifically say that. And so it was just my thought that this was an appropriate time to get that cleaned up. And so if it's the consensus of the board that we make that text amendment in conjunction with the amendment to the other amendments to the travel trailer park ordinance, then that would be.
Are we allowed to do a text amendment tonight?
Sure.
We just make a recommendation.
Yeah. I mean, it was in my past memos and all. We just hadn't talked about it yet.
With the text amendment, would that be adding these as a permitted use or conditional use?
Yes.
Which one?
Permitted.
Okay. And we probably need, any kind of motion would also include a finding of consistency with the land use plan?
Yes, sir, you do need that. And so that would be a text amendment to C3. Now, under 160.32, the camping spaces at commercial sites, I have C2 listed in there, but I don't think C2 is needed. It just needs to be C3, I1, S1, and Highway 345.
I'll make a motion on that.
Bear with me 1 second. We're looking at, you say C2 and C3 or just one of them?
Just C3, yeah,
C3, S1, Highway
345.
345.
They're in 160.32.
That in no way will conflict with the 20, up to 20, or minimum of 20 units on commercial property. It won't conflict at all. Okay.
So in that particular issue, the motion would be to recommend a text amendment that would include parks as a permitted use in those districts, C3, S1, Highway 345, and that,
Just in the C3. Just in C3. The I1 has language that says all uses that are permitted in the C3.
okay, and S1 already has everything.
One is wide open, yeah.
What about Highway 345?
Highway 345 already has language in there that says campgrounds and travel trailer parks.
We're just amending C3.
Yes.
Are we ready for a motion on that? So Chair will entertain a motion, and if it's to recommend approval, it would be to recommend a text amendment to the C3 zoning district, which would include parks as a permitted use. And that motion would include a finding of consistency with the 2009 land use plan update.
I'll make a motion.
So just for a point of clarification, this is just on the C3 text amendment. This isn't on the travel trailer park.
Right.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, because you guys will have to make a finding of consistency on the travel trailer park ordinance as well, because it's a land use ordinance.
So is your motion to recommend?
My motion is to recommend amending or approving the text amendment for the C3 portion of 160.32. And whatever.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor by David Hines to recommend a text amendment to the C3 zoning district to include parks as a permitted use. And that motion includes a finding of consistency with the 2009 land use plan update. Do we have a second? A second by Michael Barr. Is there any discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Beth says aye. Is anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Okay, that brings us to the Chapter 160, Travel Trailer Parks and Campgrounds. We have a draft ordinance here that I think we've covered pretty well over the last 3 months. The chair will entertain a motion. If the motion is to recommend approval, that motion will include a finding of consistency with the 2009 land use plan update.
And the amendments or changes that were recommended tonight.
Yes,
I'll make that.
And I will second that motion.
and that's the draft travel trailer park and campground ordinance with the changes that were agreed upon this evening. So we have a motion by Michael Bard to recommend approval of this draft ordinance. That motion includes a finding of consistency with the 2009 land use plan update. And we had a second by
I second.
Buddy Shelton. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Beth votes aye. Is anyone opposed? That motion carries unanimous, and that will go on to the commissioners, who will schedule a public hearing. Don, is there anything else on this particular issue?
No, sir.
I want to thank everybody for that. Turned out to be a little more involved than I thought when we first looked at this months ago.
I think it came full circle in a couple of places.
Yeah, I think we did a good job, though. I think it's a good improvement. Is there any other business
No,
for
sir.
the board?
No, I don't have anything.
I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Who made the motion? Motion by Terry Gore, second by Buddy Shelton. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Beth votes aye. Motion carries unanimous.